Hello, we are still reading Sidelights on Peking Life by Robert Swallow. This book can be called an insider's guide to the Hutongs, and it is from 1927. Inside the book, Robert Swallow, he is describing the pawnbrokers of Beijing. And he is describing how pawnbrokers had another function than the one we know from European or Western countries. It was actually quite common to pawn something to get money out. And this chapter gives me an interesting little opportunity to talk about something that I have been paying attention to in Beijing today. Because right now, I'm standing next to a pawnbroker in Beijing today. And originally, I actually didn't really know how many pawnbrokers you had in Beijing. But then I started to pay attention. And pretty much at every bigger road, at some pretty good locations, you will have pawnbrokers. Now, in my country, Denmark, a pawnbroker is something that almost does not exist. And when you say pawnbroker, it feels like something 100 years ago, from 100 years ago, when people were really poor and desperate to get money out. But today, just as during Robert Swallow's time, it is actually quite normal for people to go in here to get money out. And you can pawn pretty much anything, obviously of value. You can pawn like watches, you can pawn your car, or you can even pawn your apartment. And it has been like this since the late 1980s. Because as you can imagine, just after liberation in 1949, the pawnbrokers were closed down. These places, they were earning money off people without producing absolutely anything. So after 49, they were all closed down. But when Deng Xiaoping, he opened up China, you had a problem, and that was that the banking sector did actually not really have sort of a service for small entrepreneurs that needed money. You couldn't just go into a bank with your business plan and get money out, but you can in Western countries if your idea was good enough. So in the late 1980s, you opened up pawnbrokers again. And the first pawnbroker to reopen in Beijing was in 1992 around an area called Fuchongmen. And from then on, it went really fast. And today you have hundreds of pawnbrokers here in Beijing. And you can pawn pretty much anything like I just said. And the interesting thing here is that in Robert Swallow's book, it is stated that the one thing that you could not pawn was an apartment, because that was way too complicated. But in today's Beijing, you can do that. So in that way, it is actually a much more liberal institution than it was during Robert Swallow's time. Today, you can literally go in, pawn your apartment, get money out, buy stocks, then pawn the stocks, get money out, buy something else. So the pawnbroker is actually a very interesting institution that has been revived in Beijing today.